Okay, so I'm Emma. I was watching the negotiations on the green economy yesterday. So it opened with the EU stressing the necessity of a global transition to a green economy to achieve previous commitments, and they proposed placeholders for goals and targets, which were supported by Switzerland. And this was in contrast to the G77 standpoint expressed on Monday, where the group was unwilling to commit to any text that kind of mandated a global transition. So in the section on food security, which was the main thing discussed that morning, the G77 moved to retain some of its old text, but negotiated mostly based on the CST paragraphs. Switzerland added text on reaffirming rights to food, while the US moved to replace this with commitment to promoting global food security. Norway moved to include fisheries throughout the section, in addition to agriculture, while the US moved to include language on science-based, resource-efficient methods, and delete text on specifically climate change mitigation. And the EU, Canada, and Japan moved to delete references specifically to developing countries, and the US and Canada moved to delete text on enhancing access to markets. The EU and Switzerland moved to include sustainable intensification, and the US moved to delete singling out small-scale farmers, and on strengthening community-level seed supply in the commercial seed industry. And the EU, Norway, and Australia moved to replace indigenous communities with indigenous peoples throughout the text. Those are some key points.
Yes, working group 1?
Or that was working group 1.
Yeah, that was another session.
Second morning session?
Yeah.
So,
We were there.
let me look at my notes.
Who was supposed to report?
I sent my notes to someone, to your colleague. She didn't give it to you.
I can just start with a few ideas. I think it's fine. So, I mean, I was there in, almost all the session, but basically I think there was first a discussion on the introductory section to the framework for action, but actually the main issue was what was going to be the concept of that introduction to the framework for action. Is going to be long, restating again a certain number of principles, or if it's just going to be a very brief paragraph and saying, which is what the EU proposed, these are our goals, targets and actions on the following issues. So a very sharp, plea. This was not necessarily the consensus of the room. Actually, it is clear that there were concerns that if certain principles are not mentioned, in particular Agenda 21 and Rio principles are not stated at the beginning of that section, there is a risk that whatever decision coming in the framework for action might contradict whatever previous decisions on sustainable development have been taken. That said, I think the most interesting part came afterwards when the different sections and subsections were discussed, because the difference with the green economy debate, G77 agreed to comment on COCHE's text there, on each one of the COCHE's proposals. So, I mean, I think far from saying we have a debate, at least what we have is delegates discussing about the same paragraphs. So, on the poverty eradication, which is a new subsection, I mean, it was not in the zero draft and was brought there by G77, it is quite interesting that almost all the COCHE's paragraphs remained, with a few exceptions of, basically one paragraph from a G77 proposal that G77 decided to retain there, because it's basically addressing issues related to the right of development, which is a major concern for G77. They want to see the right to development in that section of poverty eradication. In terms of the concrete actions, actually, the EU and other countries say that while poverty eradication was really important, they didn't see what that section was adding in terms of new goals and new decisions. They made an exception for the last part of that section, which is on social protection. It was coming from the jobs section in the zero draft, is basically the possibility for launching a new initiative on social protection floor, which you will not be surprised for unions is a major priority. So basically what we've seen there is that if there are debates on whether yes or no poverty eradication should be a subsection, there is some sort of agreement that that part on social protection, it adds new content to the poverty eradication agenda. So that was quite positive. In the morning, I think they stopped in poverty eradication, or did they continue on there was some food? Oh yeah, there was the beginning of food, just that food went along. But I didn't pay that much attention.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm not the best person. I was not prepared to report back. So anybody wants to say something on the food? If not, we had we had Gisbert continuing in the afternoon. So maybe you can take.
So this is again the group which is discussing green economy. The afternoon session was still starting with the item on agriculture and food security, but the spirit, I think, as was already pointed out also for the morning session, has completely changed in this group. While on Monday the group of 77 was presenting still their own text and not really taking into consideration the CST, the chair's suggested text, and other delegations of course were. So you had the feeling two different things are going on. We were discussing totally different paragraphs. By yesterday morning and yesterday afternoon, this had finished, and also the group of 77 was now mainly taking the CSD text. They went through agriculture surprisingly quickly. Paragraph 64 was the first paragraph in the afternoon. The right to food is mentioned there. It was constructive, and they went through this very quickly. Then they started water. And again, I was assuming that this would be a very difficult one, but it wasn't. They went through it relatively quickly. If I may say so, onto the section on water, they watered it down sometimes. So there were, suggestions here and there to put things like, which are the typical phrasing for watering things down, on mutually agreed terms and conditions when it comes to international cooperation related to water resources and so on. But in the end, only the CSD text remained, and there were some additions, of course, but in the CSD text, but it's still a relatively streamlined text. So they started energy by the later part of the afternoon, and also the group of 77 made its suggestions on the CST text. It got longer. The energy text, CST text got longer because where it said renewable energy resources, everybody wanted to have his or her preferred renewable energy source specifically mentioned, from geothermal to wind to, you know them by heart. But again, it wasn't a bad way way of moving forward. And one thing which they did, I don't know whether the other group is doing that also, at the end of each paragraph, they agree what is deleted and what is not any longer on the table. So in many instances, the old, zero draft with amendments and all that is now off the table, and what remains is the CST. So the chair concluded the afternoon session by making this very positive statement, and I agree. This afternoon we were able to remarkably reduce the text. Here we go. So let's hope they will continue this way. Thank you.
Good. The second afternoon session